You're listening to Infoverity's Trust Us podcast, where you can gear up for your data management journey with bite-sized discussions on industry trends and thought leadership. On each episode, we'll feature industry experts to help you navigate your path to mastering your enterprise data. Welcome to today's episode of the podcast. Today, we'll be talking about getting started with data governance and data warehousing. In order to get us started, we've invited Tony Sheaffer to join us. Tony is the Director of AI and Governance at Infoverity. He recently joined us, and we're just so happy to have you here today, Tony. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem, Jocelyn. Thank you for the invitation. Go ahead, Jocelyn.
No, please, I was just going to ask, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
No, definitely. I recently joined from Databricks. I've spent quite a bit of time in data management, data space, and whether we're talking about ETL, data warehousing, data governance, AI. I have extensive experience in working in those areas, but also extensive experience in working in multiple industries. So whether we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about healthcare, finance, I've had the ability to work in all of those and then also be a part of a sales process in every one of those.
A wealth of experience to draw from, and we're so lucky that you've joined us here at Infoverity and on the podcast today. Thank you again.
No problem.
To get our discussion started, I thought it might help our listeners for you to operationally define a couple of key terms, which in my mind could start with what is data warehousing and what is data governance?
Yeah, definitely. So data warehousing is basically how do we store and manage our data, right? So if you think of it in the basic concept, it's just I'm bringing data in and I'm going to store it in a table somewhere. But it gets a lot more complex than that, right? So when we start dealing with large organizations, what you could have is I could have data that's being entered here in the United States, but I could have a team over in Europe or a team in Asia that's all trying to work with the same type of data. Right. So then you start talking about how do you store it? Do you store it on premise because you have the infrastructure to handle it, or do you store it in the cloud with one of the major hyperscalers, AWS, Google, or Microsoft, right? So how we store our data is really on the data warehousing side, and its data warehousing concept is now changing into a concept called the lakehouse. Because data warehouse tends to deal with structured information, but a lakehouse ends up dealing with your structured information and your unstructured data, right? So then it's how do I bring the data in? How do I store it? How do I access it? How do I keep it up to date? And then, more importantly, how do I keep it secure? And then that leads into that data governance aspect, which is, how do I make sure that the right people have access to the data at the right time? And that it's in a secure environment. And if somebody does access it that's not supposed to, how does my processes react to that infiltration? And so governance allows you to sit there in, the legs of the stool for governance are people, process, and technology. And I'll add one more into that, but it's having the right people around the processes that, hey, I can manage this information. And then having the technology that makes it easy for people to do that. Because back into if I'm a global $28 billion organization, I have petabytes of information that have to be managed and it has to be governed. Now, the fourth leg of that stool that I always put in there is metadata, right? Because if you're not collecting your metadata, we really need to understand when things are happening to data. But metadata allows us to identify PII type of information and PHI type data. And so that when I'm if I'm in the security group or I'm in the governance group and I want to say, hey, where is all of my PHI data, right? The system can go through and take a look for it. Now, PHI data doesn't exist just in healthcare institutes. It also is available when you talk to insurance companies, whether I'm talking about auto insurance company or life insurance or medical, right? It also exists in your employment data. You have aspects of your healthcare data that is inside of employment companies and some of your employers. So you really need to have the metadata around to help capture that information, identify and tag it, so then I can now govern that data and make it easy. Now, the other part too is the metadata is moving in that future direction of AI. Metadata is what's going to be empowering AI and empowering a data intelligent platform. So did that answer your question, Jocelyn?
It absolutely did. And I think that gives our listeners a really good foundation for the rest of our conversation here today, too. So, we've talked a lot about data governance and data warehousing. And to me, it really seems like this is a foundation of any enterprise data management program. But can you talk to our listeners about when and where on their enterprise data management journey they should be looking for inflection points where they really need to invest in these efforts?
Yeah, so I usually say when problems start occurring. Um, so I mean, every company starts out, like if you take a look at Microsoft or you take a look at Apple, they started out in a garage, right? And your database, it consisted of somebody having probably an Access or an Excel sheet that's on a desk, and that was your database, right? But all of a sudden, when you start bringing on, you have more clients or you have more parts, you have more inventory, right? And you start moving into, I have multiple areas where I have to manage data. That's when you really see I need to start migrating to a data warehouse. And historically, that used to be on premise, but now we're moving a lot of that to the cloud. And now that's what we refer to as a hybrid, right? Where I have data that resides, in my local data warehouse or on my servers in house or in a data that's out in an AWS S3, right? But you really start thinking about is when you start seeing your data growing, you have more applications for it. And then you really need to start thinking about where, what are you trying to accomplish? How are you trying to use your data? And if you have multiple people working with the data, you need to be able to monitor those transactions, right? And that leads into now I need to start taking governance into consideration of, well, we got to make sure that our environment is secure and people have only certain people have access to data that they're supposed to, right? And so data warehousing and governance really go hand in hand. You should be doing your governance strategy when you're doing your data warehousing. But data warehousing, once you get to a certain stage of it, it takes on a life of its own, and it becomes something you have to manage for the lifetime of that data warehouse, right? So it's not something you build and walk away from. You'll have to archive data, you'll have information, you'll have to run stress tests on the data. Every so often you'll actually want to hire people who actually try and penetrate your database because you want to understand, hey, where are we weak in certain areas so that if something does happen, right, that we can respond to it quickly, or I can mitigate that before it happens so I can avoid lawsuits. So, but that's when it all starts with I always say when you first start having your first problems of, hey, we've outgrown with the system that we're in. How do we take a look at doing a data migration?
Sure, sure. So when problems arise, and then when some of these issues that you just described arise, what are the first things that our listeners should think about doing? Like, what are the first actions that you would advise them to take?
Well, and this is coming from Gartner, is like take a look at the business process. So what are you trying to solve? Right. And I say this in the sense of, let's say we're talking about a healthcare institution and they're wanting to make sure that they give providers like their billing process happens more efficiently, right? Because in order to do that, I need to have all of my providers, I need to have their credentials, I need to have all this information about them, and I need to have that stored effectively. So you want to start with what is the business problem that you're trying to solve? In this case, it's, hey, we need to have effective billing. And then how do I take a look at it from how do I ingest that data into the system? How do I make sure it's clean and quality data? And then how do I present that to my end user, which could be the physician, it could be a chief financial officer, could be a wide variety of people. So
Absolutely.
start with
Absolutely.
the problem. So
That's exactly right. And I'm laughing only because that's precisely what I advise our listeners and our clients all the time. There's a million different ways that you can start any initiative that you want to on your enterprise data management journey. But what really matters with your prioritization is what problem is the most pressing for you to solve in a given moment.
oh,
That's a
exactly.
Yeah, that's a so this is a great foundation for our listeners and really appreciate the insight you've provided so far. One thing that everyone keeps talking about is AI.
Mhm.
Could you talk to our listeners a little bit about your perspective on AI and its relationship to data warehousing and data governance?
So yeah, so AI is we're in the very early stages of AI. So the best way to describe where we're at in the process of AI and AI applications is if you take a look at the internet and you take a look at the internet from 1997 to 1998, right? When everybody was just starting to, you were using dial-up at that time, right? You're on AOL, you're on Yahoo, right? That's where we were in 1998 and 1999. And it was over the phone line. So when somebody was calling you, they couldn't get in touch, and it went to your voicemail. That's where we're at currently in AI within the time period of what we can see is going to happen, right? And there's really four different areas that AI, that they basically um, they work in. One is a RAG prompt and fine tuning, right? Those are the applications, like those are the basic premises of where the market's going. In the first two, prompt and RAG model, it's like your chatbots or something happens and it feeds back to you. Right. If you go to like Perplexity or you go to ChatGPT and you ask questions against that, it gives you information back. That's where we're at in AI is like we're going to get some level of reaction from us going out there and doing something and prompting it to do it. The direction we're heading though is, and this came from a former CEO of Google. He said basically the where we're going is that one day I'll come in and I'll say in English, I'll type in write me a social media platform that can enable 5 million users. It'll have graphics in it. It'll have different areas that people can interact. And then I'm going to walk away from it. And when I come back the next day, the code will be developed and a social media platform will be there for me to go ahead and start up and run my own business. That's the direction that the big hyperscalers are seeing that we're going with AI. We're not there yet, right? And we're a long ways away from that. It can do it in certain categories. AI can write code for us, can do other things, but it doesn't it doesn't have everything behind it that we want it to today. But it is getting there quickly, right? It's 1998 to today was you know 26 years. If you take a look at internet and we still don't have fiber everywhere, we still have infrastructure problems, right? There's problems inside of AI that are going to inhibit us from moving to these other scales faster. But this also is where governance comes into play because there's two aspects of governance. The first one is metadata, because metadata identifies information that empowers the data intelligent platform, which then empowers AI. And so then I don't have to know everything about my data as a coder. I can have the system telling me what types of data it would recommend I would use for this application, right? And that enables you to have quality. One of our colleagues actually quoted today, if I have high quality data, it's going to cost me 10 times less to build an AI application. But if I have really poor quality data coming in, that AI application costs me 10x more, right? That's where at Infoverity, that's where we really come into play to help people balance that out so that when we do move to AI, it's already prepared for you. You're all ready to move at the lowest cost, most optimal way you can. And then governance is that metadata portion to empower it, but also manage the area that we that's talked about today, but it's not there yet is in regulatory requirements. When somebody uses your data for a marketing application and you start getting marketing material, then you have to understand how that data was used. If you're over in the UK, it's GDPR. For your security, if I say, hey, you have to erase all my data, well, they have to go through and prove that your information is erased and not being used in those marketing applications in that Gen AI. That's really where governance comes into play and is extremely useful because to be able to prove to somebody so I can avoid fines and penalties. In the US, it's CCPA. There's another regulatory requirement in Colorado, Virginia, Florida. That's where we need to really be paying attention to how governance can manage data. But as we move into this AI realm, how do we avoid regulatory penalties?
Absolutely. So if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's not about investing, it's not about our listeners investing in more AI functionality from the platforms they're using. It's about making sure that they're spending the time with their data up front so that their metadata is correct and they're actually going to be able to get the most of it from those AI components of the tools that they've already invested in.
100%. Yeah, yeah. If you try to start out with AI and you don't do the other things behind it, you don't do the ingestion, the data quality, the governance of it. What ends up happening is you've just built a car without an engine, you
Hmm.
know, or you've built a great Lamborghini and it's got a Pinto engine for those who remember what the Pinto is. So,
Yeah, that's right. And, I think that that's the common theme just within the enterprise data management space is AI is only going to be as good as your data is. Your data is going to enable what you're able to get from all of this new cool functionality that we're hearing so much about every day.
100%.
Yeah. So, final question before we wrap up here, which is, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about how Infoverity can help them in the data governance and data warehousing spaces?
Yeah, so we are a non-biased advisor, right? We really don't advise customers in one direction or the other on, here's the platform you should choose. We take a look at what the problem is. We take a look at your current infrastructure. We take a look at your requirements, and then we advise you on how you should move forward, once we have all of the data points in place. And this is, especially critical now because if you're talking to the Microsofts, the Databricks, the Snowflakes, there's salespeople out there trying to convince you that, hey, we have all of this functionality and everything should go here, right? Well, the reality is that that's not real. It's not, your architecture isn't going to be that simple. Your architecture is going to have a lot of nuances in it. You're going to migrate from your existing on-premise or another cloud, or you might have it in multi-clouds, right? For different various reasons. And you might need to incorporate Salesforce or Ticketmaster, right? There's something you're going to have to pull into it that doesn't make it reality to have everything is just going to be in this one system. And so we come into it and we do an evaluation and make recommendations on what's the most optimal way they can move forward to solve their problem. Not just this problem today, but that AI or Gen AI project you're going to be doing 5 years from now that you haven't really thought of. And so we really make it so your platform is highly scalable, but that you're also future proofing it so that, hey, no matter what we do, right, we're going to be able to operate this and move forward in a very effective manner, and with the least amount of technical debt that we have to incur.
That's really the name of the game, isn't it? Making these investments that customers and our listeners are doing every single day sustainable and
Mhm.
scalable and extensible for not only what they need now, but in the future. And I think it goes back to something that you said earlier, which is starting with which business problems they need to
Yeah.
solve. And I think that that's the real value of being a non-biased advisor like Infoverity is we can allow the business problems that our clients are trying to solve to lead whatever technical solutions that we enable for them.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Well, this has been a great discussion. And if I had to summarize what we've talked about here today, I would say what we're talking about when we talk about data governance and data warehousing is how we store and manage our data, and then the people's processes, technologies, and metadata that you have associated once you've stored that data. You should start investing in these things when you see problems arise, specifically when you're seeing multiple areas of the business trying to manage the same data at the same time. However, that's not the only problem that you might expect to see. Really, what you need to do is start looking at the business problems that you're experiencing and trying to figure out what technical solution you need to enable to solve those problems. And really, it all comes back to no matter what technical solution you enable, it really all comes back to making sure that your data is as good as possible, because any tool that you aspire to implement will only be as good as the data that you're working with. And it will make it better, but you really need to invest in understanding what data you have, where the problems with that data lie, and then how you really want to go forward with that. Which means that AI is a cool and fun thing. However, there's a lot of work for everyone to do if they're just starting their enterprise data management journey before they can get to the real value that some of that functionality is bringing. And if this is overwhelming to our listeners, that's okay. Infoverity has a place to start, and we can act as non-biased advisors to help you navigate your thinking about which business problems you're trying to solve and how you want to go about solving them. Would you say that that's pretty accurate summary?
Yeah. Yeah. Very accurate summary. Yep.
Great. And do you feel as if there's anything we didn't talk about today that you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I think that, the amount of time that people have nowadays to sit there and listen to a podcast, I think we covered enough there's other topics, you can move into the Gen AI and different use cases and the different vertical sectors. But no, I think you did a great job of asking me questions, and I hope I answered everything appropriately.
Oh, you most certainly did. I'm so happy that you did join the podcast today. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure our listeners will get value from it as well. And also, thank you for that great plug on future episodes that we're planning.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
For more than a decade, Infoverity has been established as an industry-leading consultancy specializing in solving enterprise data management business problems with best-in-class technical solutions. Our firm has consultants located around the globe with headquarters in Columbus, Ohio and Valencia, Spain. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you, please visit our website at infoverity.com. We've also included additional contact information in the show notes.